Human blood seeped through Paul Reyes's tattered military fatigues as the Vidians dragged his nearly lifeless body through the alien ship's corridors. Reyes forced his eyes open, struggling to stay conscious in his battered state. The Vidian raiding party had decimated his entire squad, killing 7 of humanity's most elite soldiers. Reyes was all that remained of DevGru Team Onyx. If the Vidians broke him, Earth's most sensitive military secrets would be compromised. Billions of human lives were at stake. "Take him to the medbay. Don't let this primitive creature die just yet," Commander Weason growled to his subordinates as they hauled Reyes into a sterile white room. The Vidians strapped him to an exam table and began treating his gruesome plasma burns and gaping shrapnel wounds with advanced devices that knitted flesh and bone back together. When Reyes awoke, he found himself inside a transparent holding cell deep within the bowels of the alien ship. His body still ached, but the Vidian medical technology had healed the worst of his physical injuries. Commander Weason loomed outside the cell, flanked by his second-in-command Lieutenant Zack, and 2 other burly Vidian guards brandishing neural truncheons. "Human, you will tell us the location of your species' colonies and your planet's defensive capabilities," Weason demanded, his baggy grey skin wrinkling around his mouth as he spoke. "If you resist, this mind sifter will rip the information from your feeble primate brain." Weason held up a metallic device covered in pulsing diodes and menacing barbs. Reyes said nothing, falling back on his CIA anti-interrogation training. He knew that if he broke, humanity would fall to the Vidians. But if he could escape this ship alive with intel on the aliens' plans and capabilities, he might just give Earth a fighting chance. Hours passed as Paul sat in the transparent cell, studying every inch of his prison for weaknesses. The featureless metal walls and reinforced polymer offered no obvious means of escape. As he plotted his next move, Paul overheard a conversation between 2 Vidian guards posted outside the brig. "Those human weapons are giving the techs fits," Carr grumbled, adjusting the settings on his neural truncheon. "The propulsion systems, too. Primitives shouldn't have tech that advanced." Jix nodded, his baggy grey face wrinkling with frustration. "The commander won't be happy if we can't reverse engineer their secrets soon." Paul's ears perked up. The Vidians were struggling to understand human technology. This was valuable intel that could give Earth an edge if he could escape and bring this information back. Suddenly Paul doubled over, clutching his stomach and groaning in agony. "Guards, I need help!" he shouted, his voice ragged with feigned pain. Carr and Jix exchanged a look of annoyance, but Carr eventually stepped forward and opened the cell door. As soon as the Vidian entered, Paul sprang into action. He launched himself at Carr, delivering a series of rapid strikes to the alien's pressure points. Carr crumpled to the floor, his truncheon clattering uselessly beside him. Moving quickly, Paul stripped the unconscious Vidian and donned his uniform. The garments hung loosely on his muscular human frame, but they would have to do. Using his knowledge of Vidian language and customs gleaned from the grueling interrogation sessions, Paul bluffed his way past a confused Jix and slipped out of the brig. Paul crept through the dimly lit corridors, his senses on high alert. He needed to find a computer terminal and download everything he could on Vidian technology and plans. After a tense few minutes of evading patrols, Paul located the central computer core. His fingers flew across the alien keypad as he searched for the relevant files. Ship schematics, weapons specs, colony locations. It was all here. Paul inserted a portable storage device and began the download. Suddenly, an ear-splitting alarm blared throughout the ship. Red warning lights bathed the corridors in a pulsing glow. Paul cursed under his breath. He'd been discovered. Snatching the storage device, Paul sprinted out into the corridor and ran straight into a hulking Vidian guard. Acting on instinct, Paul unleashed a devastating combaton strike to the guard's throat, crushing his windpipe. As the Vidian crumpled to the deck, Paul scooped up his fallen pulse rifle and charged down the passageway. Commander Weazen's voice boomed over the ship's intercom. "The human has escaped. All security forces converge on the computer core. Lethal force is authorized." Paul's heart pounded as he navigated the twisting corridors, his stolen rifle at the ready. A group of Vedian soldiers emerged from a side passage, their weapons spitting searing bolts of plasma. Paul dove for cover, returning fire and dropping two of the aliens with well-placed shots. Sparks flew and bulkheads buckled as the firefight intensified. Using his knowledge of the ship's layout, Paul managed to flank the remaining soldiers and dispatch them with a flurry of pulse blasts. Alarms continued to wail as he pushed deeper into the vessel, searching for a way off the ship. But Commander Wesen and his troops were closing in, their footsteps echoing through the smoke-filled corridors. Paul knew he was running out of time. Paul pressed on through the smoke-choked passageways, dispatching Vidian soldiers with precise bursts from his stolen pulse rifle. As he rounded a corner, he heard a woman's agonized screams echoing from a nearby laboratory. Peering through the reinforced glass, Paul's blood ran cold. A group of Vidian scientists, led by a gaunt figure in dark robes, were clustered around an exam table. Strapped to its surface was a human woman in the tattered remnants of a Devgru uniform. Her face was bruised and bloody, her eyes wide with terror as the Vidians subjected her to horrific experiments. "Stop squirming, human," the lead scientist, Dr. Zor, hissed. "We must understand the limits of your frail physiology." Rage consumed Paul. He shouldered his rifle and fired, blasting through the glass and dropping two of the scientists in a hail of plasma. Dr. Zor whirled around, his features twisted in shock and anger. Paul didn't hesitate. He launched himself at Zor, slamming the butt of his rifle into the Vidian's face with a sickening crunch. As Zor crumpled to the floor, Paul dispatched the remaining scientists with ruthless efficiency. "Please," the woman on the table croaked, her voice raw from screaming. "Help me." Paul rushed to her side, quickly undoing the restraints. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Paul Reyes, Devgru. What's your name, soldier?" "Lieutenant Emily Chen," she replied, wincing as she tried to sit up. "They ambushed my squad on Helios Prime, brought me here for their sick experiments." Paul helped Emily to her feet, supporting her weight as she leaned against him. "We're getting out of here, Lieutenant. Can you walk?" Emily nodded, gritting her teeth against the pain. "I'll manage, sir." Together they made their way through the ship's twisting corridors, heading for the hangar bay. Paul's heart pounded as they approached the massive doors. If they could just steal a shuttle. The doors hissed open, revealing a nightmare scene. Commander Wesen stood at the center of the hangar, flanked by a small army of heavily armed Vidian soldiers. The alien's face contorted in a triumphant sneer. "Did you really think you could escape, human?" Wesen taunted, leveling his pulse rifle at Paul's chest. Paul shoved Emily behind a stack of crates and dove for cover as a barrage of plasma bolts filled the air. He returned fire, his shots taking down several Vidians in sprays of grey blood. Emily grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon and joined the fight, her aim steady despite her injuries. Together they moved from cover to cover, their superior tactics and training allowing them to outmaneuver the Vidians. But the aliens kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. A pulse blast seared past Paul's head close enough to scorch his hair. Another found its mark, burning through his shoulder in a burst of white-hot agony. Paul gritted his teeth against the pain, forcing himself to keep fighting. They were so close to freedom he couldn't fail now. As Emily laid down covering fire, Paul sprinted for the nearest shuttle. His fingers flew across the alien controls, his years of xenotechnology training paying off as the engines roared to life. "Emily, come on," he shouted over the din of battle. Emily made a break for the shuttle, plasma bolts sizzling past her head. At the last second she tumbled inside, slamming the hatch shut behind her. Paul gunned the engines, sending the shuttle rocketing out of the hangar and into the void of space. But as they sped away from the Vidian ship, he knew their fight was far from over. The stolen data on the aliens' plans and capabilities could turn the tide of the war, if they could get it back to Earth in time. Paul glanced over at Emily, taking in the determination etched on her battered face. Together they just might have a chance. Suddenly a massive explosion bloomed behind them, the shockwave rocking the shuttle. Paul smiled grimly. The charges he had planted throughout the hangar had done their job, crippling the Vidian ship and buying them precious time. Paul's knuckles turned white as he gripped the shuttle's controls, fighting against the waves of pain radiating from his wounded shoulder. Behind them, a swarm of Vidian fighters closed in, their plasma cannons spitting deadly bolts of energy. "Emily, I need you on those guns!" Paul shouted over the blaring alarms. Emily, her face still bruised from the Vidian experiments, slid into the gunner's seat and wrapped her fingers around the triggers. The shuttle shuddered as she unleashed a barrage of return fire, her shots finding their mark and turning two of the pursuing fighters into blooms of flame. But the Vidians kept coming, their superior numbers allowing them to absorb the losses and maintain pursuit. Plasma blasts hammered the shuttle's weakening shields, and warning lights flashed across the control panels. Paul checked the fuel gauge and cursed under his breath. They were running on fumes. At this rate, the Vidians would run them down long before they could reach friendly space. Desperately, Paul scanned the starfield ahead, searching for anything that could give them an edge. His gaze settled on a dense asteroid field, a chaotic swirl of tumbling rocks that promised both danger and opportunity. "Hold on!" he yelled, wrenching the shuttle into a sharp dive. Emily braced herself against the gunner's console as the shuttle plunged into the asteroid field, the space rocks filling the view screen like a hail of cosmic bullets. Paul's hands flew over the controls, his reflexes and spatial awareness pushed to their limits as he jinked and wove through the deadly obstacles. The Vidian fighters, less adept at navigating the treacherous field, struggled to keep up. One fighter clipped an asteroid and spun out of control, slamming into another rock in a blinding explosion. Two more fell victim to the asteroids, their hulls crumpling under the relentless impacts. But Paul flew like a man possessed, his focus absolute as he threaded the shuttle through gaps that seemed impossibly small. The shuttle's hull groaned under the stress, and Emily had to fight down a surge of nausea as the inertial dampeners struggled to compensate for the wild maneuvers. After what felt like an eternity, they burst out of the other side of the asteroid field, battered but alive. Paul allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction until a shadow fell across the shuttle, and a deep, rumbling voice filled the comm. "Human vessel, this is Admiral Zahn of the Vidian battlecruiser Inexorable. Surrender now or be destroyed." Paul's blood ran cold as he took in the sight of the massive warship, looming before them, its hull bristling with enough firepower to reduce the shuttle to atoms. He knew they couldn't outfight it. They couldn't outrun it. But maybe, just maybe, they could surprise it. "Emily," Paul said, his voice calm and clear despite the fear clawing at his heart, "I need you to trust me." Emily met his gaze, her eyes filled with a grim determination that mirrored his own. "What's the plan, sir?" Paul took a deep breath, his fingers tightening on the controls. "We're going to ram the bastard." Without waiting for a response, Paul gunned the engines and set the shuttle on a collision course with the Inexorable's bridge. Alarms screamed and warning lights flashed as the shuttle hurtled toward the Vidian ship, the distance between them vanishing with terrifying speed. Admiral Zahn's voice filled the comm again, this time tinged with a hint of panic. "Human vessel, disengage at once. You cannot hope to—" But Paul had already tuned him out. His entire world had narrowed to the looming bulk of the battlecruiser, to the flickering readouts that tracked their approach, to the certainty that this was their only chance. He could hear Emily's breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps as she braced for impact. He could feel the shuttle shuddering around them, its abused frame straining under the demands of its suicidal charge. And then, just as the battlecruiser's bridge filled the view screen, just as Paul prepared himself for the bone-crushing jolt of collision, he wrenched the shuttle into a sharp climb, skimming the Inexorable's hull with scant meters to spare. Proximity alarms howled as the shuttle's belly nearly scraped the Vidian armor, the heat of its engines scorching the alien metal. And then they were past, hurtling away from the battlecruiser at breakneck speed. Behind them, the Inexorable wallowed like a wounded beast, its crew thrown into chaos by the near miss. Paul didn't give them a chance to recover. As soon as they were clear, he brought the shuttle around in a tight loop, aiming for the battlecruiser's vulnerable rear quarter. Emily, anticipating his intent, unleashed a salvo of missiles, the warheads slamming into the Inexorable's engines in a blinding cascade of explosions. The battlecruiser shuddered under the impacts, its shields flickering and failing as secondary explosions rippled along its hull. Escape pods began to jettison from the stricken ship, the Vidayan crew abandoning their posts in a desperate bid for survival. Paul watched the Inexorable's death throes with a grim satisfaction, his heart pounding in his chest. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck a blow against the Vidians that would be felt across the galaxy. But even as the adrenaline of victory coursed through his veins, Paul knew their fight was far from over. The data they carried could change the course of the war, but only if they could get it back to Earth in time. He glanced over at Emily, taking in the determination etched on her bruised and bloodied face. She met his gaze, a fierce grin tugging at the corners of her mouth. "So," she said, her voice rough with exhaustion and exhilaration, "what's our next move, sir?" Paul turned back to the controls, his jaw set with renewed resolve. "We get this intel back to command," he said, plotting a course for the nearest friendly outpost. "And then we make the Vidians regret the day they ever set foot on human soil." The shuttle leapt forward, its engines flaring bright against the stars, as it carried its battered but unbroken crew deeper into the unknown. As the shuttle hurtled towards the Vidian battlecruiser's bridge, Paul gritted his teeth, his hands white-knuckled on the controls. Beside him, Emily braced herself against the console, her face a mask of grim determination. They both knew this was the end, but they were ready to make their sacrifice count. Suddenly a blinding flash of light erupted in the void, and a massive shape emerged from the swirling vortex of hyperspace. It was the UES Titan, a human warship bristling with advanced weaponry. At its helm stood Admiral Sarah Reyes, Paul's older sister, her eyes hard as she took in the scene before her. "Open fire," Sarah barked, and the Titan's guns roared to life, spitting lances of searing energy at the Vidian battlecruiser. The alien ship shuddered under the onslaught, its shields flickering and failing as the Titan's advanced weaponry tore through its hull. Paul's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. The Titan must have tracked his location using the hidden transponder in his armor. He quickly veered the shuttle away from the battlecruiser's bridge, aiming instead for the Titan's hangar bay. The shuttle hit the deck hard, skidding and sparking as it careened across the hangar. Paul and Emily were thrown forward, their restraints digging into their flesh as the craft finally came to a shuddering halt. The shuttle's hatch was wrenched open, and a team of human soldiers poured in, their weapons at the ready. They quickly extracted Paul and Emily, rushing them to the hangar's medical bay as the deck crew swarmed over the damaged shuttle. On the bridge of the Titan, Sarah stood face to face with a flickering hologram of Admiral Zahn, the Vidian commander. Zahn's face was contorted with rage and pain, his ship burning around him. "Surrender now," Sarah demanded, her voice cold as steel. "Release any human prisoners you have, and we will show mercy." Zahn spat, his baggy grey skin quivering with hatred. "The Vidians will never submit to human domination," he snarled. "We would rather die than bend the knee to your kind." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "So be it," she said, and cut the transmission. She turned to her weapons officer, her face grim. "Destroy that ship. Leave nothing but ashes." The Titan's guns spoke again, and the Vidian battlecruiser vanished in a blinding fireball, its debris spiraling into the void. Zahn and his crew were no more. In the medical bay, Paul and Emily were hailed as heroes by the Titan's crew, their bravery and sacrifice praised and honored. But as the adrenaline faded, Paul felt a hollow ache in his chest. He knew that his actions, necessary as they were, had likely doomed any chance of peaceful coexistence between humans and Vidians. He stood alone in the Titan's observation deck, staring out at the stars. The cost of victory weighed heavy on his soul. The war between humans and Vidians had only just begun, and he knew that many more lives would be lost before it was over. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, Please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.